Hello and welcome to the Klassiki Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Goff. Klassiki is your window into the world of Eastern European film. Subscribers gain access to our library of classic and contemporary titles, as well as filmmaker interviews, video introductions, program notes, and much more. You can sign up for a free trial today at klassiki.online. If you enjoy the show, don't forget to subscribe in your podcast app of choice, and remember you can always get in touch with us at podcast@klassiki.online. When he died in 2023 at the age of 89, Otar Iosseliani was still something of a well-kept secret amongst festival goers and Soviet cinema fans. Renowned in his native Georgia as one of the nation's greatest filmmakers, he spent the majority of his career in his adoptive home of France after emigrating in the early 80s. But no matter where it's made, there's no mistaking a Iosseliani film, with their bustling long takes, mordant satire, and anarchic sympathy for the drunks, losers, and misfits of both Soviet communism and Western capitalism. The good news is that English language audiences are about to become much more familiar with Iosseliani's work, with Cinema Guild recently announcing a slate of restorations. And that news has occasioned an extensive retrospective in New York. Otar Iosseliani, Fables of Modern Life, opens this week at Asia Society before heading over to Metrograph, and we're delighted to say that Klassiki will be co-presenting the programme at both venues. So this week I spoke about the retrospective and Iosseliani's singular body of work with Edo Choi, film programmer at Metrograph, and Inney Prakash, Curator of Film at Asia Society. Listeners may remember Inney from our episode about the great Ali Hamraev from last year. We discussed Iosseliani's burgeoning reputation and what informs his unique cinematic sensibility, which bears comparison with directors from Jacques Tati to Jean-Luc Godard and even the Safdie Brothers. So, if you're in New York, then don't miss out. Fables of Modern Life kicks off at Asia Society on the 24th and the 25th of July, and then continues at Metrograph from the 8th to the 23rd of August. If you're not in New York, then Klassiki subscribers can watch a double bill of Iosseliani titles on the site from this Thursday the 23rd. That's his wonderful feature debut Falling Leaves and the later French farce Farewell Home Sweet Home. Links for all of that are in the show description. Edo, welcome to the show, and Inney, welcome back. So great to speak with you.
Thanks for having me.
Great to speak with you. Yeah, thank you.
And the pleasure's all mine. And we're really excited about this season. We're really delighted to be co-presenting it from a distance with you over there in New York. And it's great to have the opportunity to talk about Otar Iosseliani in any circumstances. So just to start off with, it would be great to just get a bit of background on this season, this retrospective, and how it came together across Asia Society with you, Inney, and Metrograph with you, Edo. I mean, who wants to pick up the story there about how the season came together and why Iosseliani, why now, etc., and so on?
Well, Cinema Guild, which is a distributor, an independent distributor here in New York, acquired for North American distribution the restorations to Iosseliani's 3 Georgian features. And this was a hint about this was dropped on Twitter by Cinema Guild.
I remember.
Staff member Edward McCary, who's a friend, and I immediately emailed him and asked him, okay, what's going on? Because I've been curious about Iosseliani's work for a very, very long time. So Ed told me that, they had just acquired them. They were planning on a kind of summer rollout and then Inney, who is a friend, had already expressed interest as well. So as happens in New York, there's a number of great repertory programs, art house cinemas, and there are a lot of programmers who are thinking along the same lines when a new restoration pops along. So rather than compete, I think it's best to collaborate. I think given that Inney and I are so close, it's easy for us to work together. So We worked it out such that Asia Society would premiere these three new restorations, and then we would do a larger retrospective at Metrograph of the French work, including the Georgian restorations and some of the shorts as well.
Mm.
And yeah, and I'm very pleased that this is happening, that this came together.
I think Edo pretty much covered it. It's one of these situations where, I think we both had interest in Iosseliani passively for a while, and then the occasion of new restorations being acquired provides an opportunity, right, to dive in. And for Asia Society, it made the most sense to stick with his Georgian features. There may be contention about whether Georgia is part of Asia, but I opt towards having as expansive definition as possible so that I can simply play as much as I want to. I'll say Asia Society also considers Australia part of Asia, so they definitely stretch the limits, and I'm happy to consider Georgia within the scope of our purview for this as well. I really adore these features, and I'm excited to partner with Edo and Cinema Guild and you guys.
I was just going to ask, so there's going to be an Arthur and Corinne Cantrell retrospective at Asia Society when?
Oh, I absolutely have not ruled that out.
I was going to say there was a period a few days ago where Australia were the last quote unquote Asian team left in the World Cup. So I think
That's funny.
So I mean, was there how difficult was it then to pull this together? It sounds like through the Cinema Guild Connect, there was materials might have been a little easy to come by with this one, or was it were there any
Well, there's
interesting
always
kind
a
of programming
question.
stories around this one, this retro?
Not particular. I mean, it ended up being shockingly easy, to be honest, from our end, because the restorations that Cinema Guild acquired were, I think, commissioned probably by Yosseliani's production company,
Mm.
which still exists in some form, like in some sort of estate form, and then Film de Los Anges, which is a French sales agent. They have the international rights to literally the entire filmography, probably through this company. So we discovered once we looked into it that Losange has new scans of every movie, not just the
Right.
three that Cinema Guild acquired, including the shorts, which is this is not, this is atypical,
Yeah.
to have all the rights kind of controlled in one place and to have all the films available in HD. That's sort of a gift to a film programmer. So that's why it was feasible to do this, and why we didn't need outside funding from, say, or a Georgian cultural organization, or partnership with the consulate, or something like that.
I mean, I'm interested. You saying there, Edo, that when you saw that these restorations were in the works, it kind of piqued your interest because Iosseliani was this name that you'd been familiar. It was a name that you'd heard people talking about. Inney, I don't know what your history was, but I'm interested. Like when Iosseliani was like a name in the ether, what did it represent? What was the reputation, if you like, at one remove for this figure before you kind of like came to really engage with the work?
For me, it was, I was quite unfamiliar. I knew the name, right? And I had the name ringing around in my head as this is kind of like a great filmmaker whose work I have yet to acquaint myself with. So often programming is an opportunity not just to display your knowledge and experience, but to take advantage of stuff you yourself want to catch up on. And I was the same as Edo. When I saw that Cinema Guild had these, I immediately reached out. I think I might have seen Georgian Ancient Songs, the short, which we can talk about, but I think is a very
Yeah.
important piece of the filmography.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to get into the shorts because, he was able to make relatively few films in Georgia. So in fact, like the shorts that he made are actually quite like significant part of the Georgian side of his filmography. Okay, well, look, maybe we should just let's just get into the films then. I mean, we can people can look up Iosseliani's biography online if they're interested. But I mean, I think the important thing, which is reflected in the programming of this retrospective, right, is that he's a Georgian filmmaker from Soviet Georgia who manages to make 3 features, a medium length called April, and then a handful of shorts, running into a series of kind of, the standard studio censorship issues along the way, working in the Soviet system. And then at the beginning of the 80s, I think in 1982, if I'm not mistaken, he leaves to go to France in search of more kind of autonomy and freedom. And whether he found it there, I guess, is something we can debate. But I mean, maybe if we start with the Georgian films, I mean, Edo, when you first kind of sat down with a film like Falling Leaves, right, his first feature, what was the experience of immersing yourself in that very particular Iosseliani world, which I'm sure you're much more familiar with now?
Yeah, I mean, so like Inney, Iosseliani was more or less just a name for me, not until this retrospective, but until maybe, let's say, a few years ago. And I got more tuned into exactly the context that he emerged within over the last few years when I was starting to work on a retrospective that we did on Boris Barnett, which actually
Right.
we finally, that retrospective finally came together just this year. But I had been working on it for a couple of years, and Yosseliani was he met Barnett. I do not think Barnett was ever an instructor at VGIK, the National Film School. But
No, I don't think so.
yeah, but he was certainly a figure that generation of students at VGIK looked up to. And there's a interview that Bernard Eisenschitz published between, excerpts from between Yosseliani and Barnett. And so I became more interested, or just at least more kind of aware of how to place Yosseliani generationally and historically as a member of this kind of new wave. It's not called a new wave, but it's sort of a new wave of Soviet cinema
Hmm.
that emerges in the early to mid 60s, with actually another Georgian filmmaker, Marlon Kutsiev, being sort of he's the forerunner to the rest of the generation because he's a little older and his career starts a little bit earlier, like in the mid 50s. And a lot of the cinema is from the margins. And Ney did a program last year on Ali Hamrayev, the great Uzbek master, which was a revelation for me. I mean, Hamrayev is another filmmaker that I kind of vaguely aware of, but hadn't seen the films. And Hamrayev's breakout film, not his first film, but like his kind of first personal film, White Storks, is actually from the same year as Falling Leaves, 1966.
Yeah.
And there are a number of other really important Soviet films, but from this generation that are 1966. I mean, technically, Andrei Rublev is 1966, even though it's not released until it's released in a more shortened or abbreviated form in 1968. I think Larissa Shepiko's one of her films is from 66. There's also a film,
Wings.
there's an Ella, yeah, I think Wings is that from 66?
Oh, I
Am
should know
I
this. It's
making this
60.
up?
It's 65 or 66.
Yeah, it's 66, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's 66. There's a great Kyrgyz filmmaker, Tola Mushokeyev, whose film The
Mm.
Skies of Our Childhood is 66. So this is the sort of moment of crystallization for this generation of Soviet filmmakers who are from all corners of the Soviet, so to speak, imperium, right?
Yeah.
Within this kind of imperial domain of the Soviet Union. There are Georgian filmmakers, Armenian filmmakers. I think Mountain Patrol, the Artavaz Taleshian short, is also 66, one of his first short films. And those are all filmmakers who I'm a little bit more aware of for the most part, or I've seen some of their work. So Yosseliani's film, I was viewing within that context. And there are features of it that I think are still very much vernacular for the time. There's this kind of emphasis on socialist realism, of people, uh, ordinary people, who are working people, who actually have jobs, which is like often in American films today, right? It's like sort of what does everybody do? You know, they're a
Yeah.
writer. We never see them write. And but in this, in Iosseliani's Georgian films, at least, there is a strong emphasis on the working life and of people, and most of their relationships are relationships formed at the workplace or in and around their time on or off the clock, right? But then there are features that are extremely idiosyncratic and poetic and strange. There's a sense of a kind of comedic and I think this I locate this, very intuitively. So this isn't really grounded in like say testimony from Iosseliani on his own work. Uh, but intuitively I sort of locate a certain musical sensibility in the way that Iosseliani organizes narrative.
Mm.
So even in these early Georgian features, where there are more clear protagonists, because in the later European films, and something like Favorites of the Moon, it's a kind of a network narrative. It's a little bit more like Tati or late Godard, like
Yeah.
the movies that Godard was making in the '80s, where there is like a kind of colorful sort of where's Waldo field of characters and all these different types. But in the Georgian films, there are quite clear protagonists. There's moral dilemmas that they're presented with, and they're followed very closely. And yet he continually admits into this more linear structure, these kind of non-linear sketches, so these things that kind of disrupt the linear flow or rhythm. Like you could say that there's a central melody, but there's constantly details, episodes, events that are disturbing this or complicating or inflecting or sometimes harmonizing, but usually kind of at dissonance with this linear flow. And that's kind of the life of Georgia, of the everyday life of Georgia, and the kind of cacophony of its streets, and this clash between the traditional ways of life of a people with this modern urban Soviet life. And
Yeah.
yeah. So anyway, sorry, I'm going on a bit, but
No,
that's kind
it's
of what
No,
that was
just
my
to just
first
to
impression. Yeah.
jump off of that, I
Mm.
think it's very important that Iosseliani has a background as a musician. He studied music
right. I was going to say, yeah.
before cinema, and also mathematics, which there's a schematic element to his later films, especially too. But the reason I was talking about the importance of Georgian ancient songs is it's split into four sections, right? And it's about Georgian polyphony across different regions throughout time. And polyphony is this, like, essentially when you have coinciding melodies, right? There's no dominant melodies. There's multiple happening simultaneously, and especially in the later films, what you get is this really narrative polyphony with Iosseliani. But as Edo said in the early ones as well, there are hints of it. And there are also another early short that's really important is April, which is it's about like
Yeah.
mid-length, like 40, 50 minutes
40,
or something
50
like
minutes,
that.
yeah.
And it does have two main characters, but it unfolds almost like this silent film with this incredible cast of extras moving in and out of the frame. It's about this couple essentially trying to find a place to be alone. And they're kind of beset on all sides by urban machinations. There's like a very funny strain about these old men trying to move this furniture into a new housing development. But the way it's all orchestrated is also incredibly musical, and the moving parts kind of echo in Iosseliani's much later films as well.
I'm misremembering because it's been a while since I watched April, but it has no dialogue, am I right? Or maybe just a little bit of kind of nonsense dialogue. It's effectively a silent
Exactly.
film.
It's effectively a
Yeah.
silent film, or non-dialogue film.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you watch again Iosseliani's late films, and although there's very much dialogue, you could arguably watch them without understanding it and still get the essence of the film.
I mean, there's so much to pick up on what you're both saying. Just going back to the a point you were making originally, Edo, like about Boris Barnett, who listeners of the podcast, we did an episode about Barnett, kind of based on this retrospective that you mentioned, and about the increased interest in Barnett. And Barnett is a really important figure for Iosseliani. And Barnett's always held up as this kind of path not taken in Soviet cinema, and the word that's always used to describe this untaken path is kind of lyrical or poetic. And I think one thing that kind of Georgian cinema in particular in the post-war period, like the cliche or the stereotype, if you like, that got attached to it, was this idea of lyricism and poetry. And it's precisely because of people like Iosseliani, and then, I don't know, Tengiz Abeladze, Eldar Shengalaya, Georgi Shengalaya, figures like that. So like that's definitely there. That's definitely this kind of lineage. And yeah, I think the thing about work that you're mentioning, Edo, is also super interesting. Iosseliani is so interested in this, like, I don't know if it's a tension or a contrast between artisanal craft, whether that's, making music or making wine, which is a very Georgian thing
or
to
making
do.
bombs
Or making bombs, and the kind of alienation of labor, the kind of alienation of modern industrialized labor, which is something that, say in Falling Leaves, right, it's about, it's set in a Soviet kind of industrial wine factory, I guess you'd call it. And it's kind of contrasted with this kind of traditional, hands-on approach to making wine in your own backyard. So that's another thing for him that's super interesting. I'm just thinking about a film like There Once Was a Singing Blackbird, which I know we've all seen. I think it might be my favorite of his films. I think it really illustrates the point you were making about the very particular kind of form that his narratives take, where they have this flow to them, where you're kind of moving from situation to situation very, very kind of easy. They're not kind of angular or jagged in that sense, but it's more just like people moving through the city, moving through spaces. Every other scene, there's a new incidental character. I mean, I was rewatching it recently. It's basically a Safdie Brothers film, that There Once Was a Singing Blackbird, right? It's about...
Oh no.
Well, it's up to you whether you think that's a good thing or bad thing, but it's about a guy just kind of like constantly rushing around the city, getting hassled by people who he owes money or favors to, as he attempts to kind of achieve this goal, which in this case is to not be late for his job as a percussionist in the orchestra.
I will just say that he is far more charming than any Safdie Brothers character ever was or ever will be.
Well, yeah, that's the Georgian lyricism versus the kind of brash
Exactly.
American.
Yeah.
He's a very charming ne'er-do-well, not totally unlike the protagonist of Falling Leaves.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but he doesn't have the integrity that the protagonist of Falling Leaves has. I mean, he's an interesting character. Actually, the character that he reminded me the most of is the protagonist of Charles Burnett's My Brother's Wedding. Because in My Brother's Wedding, there's this young man who is torn between his kind of fidelity to his family and the traditions of his family, the kind of a more rooted way of life, let's say, and the all the temptations that pull him away from that rootedness, hanging out with friends, flirting or trying to pick up girls, borrowing money from people in order to kind of get ahead quick, pulling favors. And in the end, he suffers from, I think the way Burnett once put it, is a certain kind of moral paralysis. He cannot choose between one path or the other. He's poised between these two, and that's a little bit like this character, this timpanist in the Tbilisi Orchestra, in 1970 Tbilisi. He is pulled between this very hyper accelerated urban life, with all of its temptations, staying out late, flirting with practically every woman he sees. I don't think I've ever seen a film where, I mean, sometimes you establish a character as a bit of a Lothario, a bit of an Alfie type, and maybe he flirts with two or three women. You set that kind of dynamic up, but literally this guy flirts with almost every woman who
Well, he
who
seems to
appears
have
in the movie.
slept with every woman in Tbilisi,
Yeah,
as far as you could
exactly.
tell.
Yeah.
Right. He seems to have fallen out
Yeah.
of favor with them through his
Yeah. But there's a
yeah,
certain, I think
subsequent
that
behavior.
points to a certain a tonal absurdity, a set tone of absurdity. The absurdism that I think becomes much more overt in like something like Favorites of the Moon. Nonetheless, that's here in that it's kind of improbable that there would be any guy who would have slept with this many women, right? And flirted with this many women. Um, uh, and and he really doesn't change or seem to learn from his behavior at all, which is kind of like the classic white like Western dynamic, is that over
Yeah.
time he reaches a low point, he figures it out, he comes to some sort of self realization or understanding. This doesn't happen at all for this guy. And so there's a certain, I think, again, going back to the musical analogy and to Iosseliani's musical training, he sort of is just a personification of a melody. He's this blackbird that's like running through the film. And the melody has a little bit of, there's some rises and falls, but it's kind of the same melody the whole way through. And the complications that are introduced are is all of the details that spin around him like a maelstrom.
Yeah.
An interesting note about his working with actors is he seemed to have like a tight control that he liked to maintain. He was not fond of letting his actors read their scripts, and
Mm-hmm.
instead preferred them to have as little conception of their character as possible. He, really, there's an interview where he rails against, method acting and the Stravinsky. Yeah, he was a certain kind of director.
Yeah, I mean, and particularly once you get into the French films, and like you've said, Edo, right, like we're into kind of more the realm of like a Tati film, that almost kind of a completely depersonalized
Precisely.
series of kind of pieces being moved around a game board by Iosseliani. Once we get into the French films, I think you can certainly see he's not doing a lot of kind of deep psychological work with the actors and with the characters. I mean, maybe that's an interesting point to pick up, actually, because it's so great to have a retrospective that has his Georgian work and at least some of his French work side by side, because I think a lot of people probably know him either from his Georgian or from his French work, and it's great to have them side by side. I don't know. I mean, Inney, like, how would you describe, if you think there is one, the difference between these two kind of these two facets of his career? Like, how would you sum up what happens to his filmmaking once he's in France? I mean, we've touched on it a little already there.
I think you said it well. You do get a sense more that he's playing with pieces on a board or something, and there's more this process that begins with pastoral, right, which is what I referred to earlier.
Georgian feature.
His last Georgian feature, which I referred to as this kind of like polyphonic narrative, right, where you're not following any single protagonist, but instead seeing it. It almost feels like a bunch of dominoes set into motion, right? There's just like constant movement within the frame. It's like, it's like one sort of action sets off others. The characters are very briefly intersecting. They're all on their own kind of paths of adventure. And we get kind of this almost bird's eye view of the action. And, we're glimpsing different parts of it as it unfolds. And the Tati comparison, which I know he bristled against, but I think in the way that filmmakers often will against comparisons they get too often is pretty apt. There are moments that feel like out of a Tati film, but just the way the camera's moving, the way the people are moving within the frame, the way the music is going. And he has these kind of archetypes he returns to, these characters. The young man, kind of ne'er-do-well, you see pop up again. There's this guy's barely hanging on to his job in the orchestra, right? The most recent one I watched, I think, was Farewell, Home Sweet Home. And right, there's a young man in that who's just like hopelessly hanging on to his job as a dishwasher. He just can't hack it. You have the usually there's kind of a drunk somewhere in the films. There's a running theme of alcohol in Farewell, Home Sweet Home, really charmingly played by Iosseliani himself. So it becomes this like set of kind of archetypes almost who are bounced off each other in a way that creates a kind of like very full and depersonalized but rich and entertaining tapestry.
Yeah, and I also would say that Tati is definitely a good analogy to compare him to, but also a good source of contrast, because Tati's work, I think quite famously, there are frames in Tati's work where he deliberately destabilizes the direction of the gaze. So he creates so many layers
Mm.
of interlocking action within one frame. I'm not talking about within a scene or across multiple shots, that you literally don't have a like one primary focus. Like
Yeah.
your eye is not guided towards a certain zone or point on in the composition. He deliberately makes it so that you shouldn't be doing that. You should, when you look at a very rich Tati frame, like in say the restaurant sequence in Playtime, there's multiple things that you could be looking at, right, in one of those shots. I think that Iosseliani, there's some frames like that, but actually usually Iosseliani is guiding your eye pretty carefully, right?
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
have you kind of know what you're looking at per shot, but it's this accumulation of movements, details, crisscrossing events and actions and characters that creates this Tati feeling, right? This feeling that there's more that you could focus on. And I think that that's why, for me, actually, it's more akin to what Godard was doing at exactly the same time in the 80s. So like Favorites of the Moon is 84, I think. And it reminded me so much of a Godard film that he made of just like 3 years later, called Keep Your Right Up, or Soigne Toi Droite, Une place sur la terre, or A Place on Earth. And that film, much like Favorites of the Moon, actually has a musical ensemble that he keeps returning to. So at the beginning of Favorites of the Moon, there's this string ensemble who are practicing a piece, and they're rehearsing a piece, and he cuts back to them two or three times. Almost to establish the musical structure of the larger film. And Godard does a very similar thing with a rock band who are rehearsing
Mm.
in Keep Your Right Up. And both films are these network narratives. There's more characters than you can really keep track of, more storylines than you can really keep track of. But there is a sense, even as planned as this all has to be, there's a sense of randomness. This is something that Tati doesn't have. Tati's worlds are very ordered. They're almost toy-like or doll-like.
Yeah.
You can feel how, I mean, Tati is a little bit more akin to Wes Anderson, right? Everything is very planned before he starts even making the film. But in Favorites of the Moon, I get the sense of a filmmaker who is trying to have work with a larger compositional structure, and yet admit documentary randomness, like pick up details and pieces of bits of inspiration and texture that could only have come to him in process of production, right? Not everything being fully planned, So yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that, because when I was rewatching the Georgian films, one of the notes I made this time, right, was that he's famous for these quite long takes. They're hardly kind of like virtuosic oneers or anything, but the note I made was that he'll hold the shot on, say, the cafe or the restaurant or the street scene just long enough at the end of the kind of supposed action that you can feel like a documentary waft start to blow in. Like the street scene will continue for just long enough that you feel like real life enter into the fictional world. I just wanted to I had written that, I had noted that down, and that's in the Georgian context, right, where he probably has to go looking for those subversive moments where he can find them. It would have been harder to kind of build them into the structure.
But it's also, I mean, I that's true. It's also, though, I think probably equally true that when you are working on a low budget and a tight schedule, one of the ways to enrich your
Right.
canvas is to work with what happens and happens almost on its own. And I mean, we haven't really discussed his use of sound, which for me is one of the more remarkable aspects of his work. But it creates a whole other layer of space in his films. The sheer amount of song and music that are just on the soundtrack and that are he's continually toggling between different sources of sound, eras of sound. So there's classical music, budding modern folk music or rock music. This is true of both the French and the Georgian films, and it's almost like someone changing channels on a radio and radios are in his films too. Then you hear radio interviews and ads and stuff like that, and that sense of picking up things, frequencies, things that are are caught on the waves of modern life. That I think is very much a part of the aesthetic. Is that the documentary work that he did in these short films and things like Georgian Asian Songs, in the opening passage of Falling Leaves, which is purely documentary of the winemaking, that bleeds into the more formalist construction of the films.
And he made documentaries as well, besides Georgian Ancient Songs, and later on in his career, including one about some monks in Tuscany.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Another aspect I think that's interesting. So another distinction he made between himself, he himself made between him and Tati, was that he said Tati was a clown, right? He did clowning, and he's like, I tell fables, and that's Edo came up with this very apt title for the series, which is Fables of Modern Life. And even though there's this sense of randomness and chaos in the movies, it is usually they are parables in a sense. There is something he's tying it to in the end, or some kind of like statement he's trying to make. One of the most interesting films. They're all interesting, but I recently watched And There Was Light, this film he shoots in a Senegalese village. That's very much about the encroachment of modernity on this disappearing way of life. And he wraps all of his tendencies and his affects and all the things we're talking about up in this kind of like, it's not an aggressive message, but it's very much it's very obvious, and it's very intended. And I think that's not that element. There's a through line with the other movies, even when it's not so obvious what the message or what the parable is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that film in particular, which, a very strange film, I can imagine wouldn't get made today for a number of different reasons, but the message kind of creeps up on you. At the end, it's very clear. But what's one thing so striking about that film is for long stretches at the beginning, kind of 45 minutes or so, right? You're just basically watching largely unsubtitled scenes from this Senegalese village unfolding, not grounded in any clear narrative, not grounded in any clear kind of sense of character. He really does
Right.
like give the material the room to breathe, to use another cliche, in a way that sets him apart. I mean, do either of you have any other Jerry Springer style final thought that you'd like to impart to the
I
dear
mean, I just
listener?
want to encourage folks, if you're in New York, to come out to the retrospective, come out to Asia Society, come out to Metrograph, see these movies. They're incredibly rich. If you're elsewhere, seek them out.
I mean, absolutely. Yeah, you can watch a couple of them. Sadly, on Klassiki, not the full gamut. But yeah, it's great that these films are getting the restoration and the exposure that they deserve. And Iosseliani is going to go, hopefully, from being a name on people's lips to someone that people really engage with. But I think we'd best leave it there for today. But Edo and Inney, thanks so much for joining me, and yeah, really excited about this retrospective of the great Otar Iosseliani. But thank you again for taking the time.
Thanks so much, Sam.
Thank you. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Edo.